toutes et à tous, et bienvenue. A very good evening to everyone, and a warm welcome to the event, Women, Peace and Security in Focus, Equal Power, Equal Rights, Equal Future. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the French residents on behalf of the United Nations Association of New Zealand, Wellington branch, and the French Embassy. Tonight's event celebrates International Women's Day and highlights the importance of gender equality with a focus on women, peace and security, digital safety, and women leadership. My name is Amandine Ruinart, and it's my privilege to serve as your MC this evening in my capacity as a member with the United Nations Association of New Zealand, Wellington branch, an organization that promotes the work and values of the United Nations and encourage engagement with global challenges. We are grateful to have 4 remarkable speakers with us this evening, all deeply engaged in advancing this important field. Merci beaucoup à vous d'être venus ce soir. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. In case of an emergency, there are 2 exits. One on the right leading to the veranda, and the second is the main entrance of the building. The restrooms are located in front of the main entrance door. Kindly, please ensure your phones are on silence. Please also note that photos and videos may be taken during the evening. Thank you, and now let's begin our program. To formally open tonight's event, it's my pleasure to invite the President of United Nations Association of New Zealand, Wellington branch, Mr. Ishant Ghuylani, to deliver the welcome address. Ishant is the first person of Indian origin to hold this role. A community leader and advocate for multilateralism, sustainability and youth engagement, he also serves as a Justice of the Peace in New Zealand. Professionally, Ishant is the commercial and political manager at the High Commission of India in Wellington, strengthening India-New Zealand ties in trade, culture, education, while promoting the UN values of peace, unity, equality, and international cooperation. Please join me in welcoming Ishant Ghuylani.
Kia ora koto, bonjour, good evening everyone, and a very warm welcome to the residents de France. Ko Ishant toku ingoa, and it's my pleasure on behalf of United Nations Association Wellington branch to welcome you all to the special roundtable, Women, Peace and Security in Peace, Equal Power, Rights and Future. Naha mana, naha rio, naha karatanga, maha tenakoto katoa. As we mark International Women's Day, we are reminded that gender equality is not only a matter of fairness, but a cornerstone of sustainable peace, inclusive development, and resilient societies. Around the world today, the United Nations continues to address the complex challenges from ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crises to the growing concerns around the digital safety, misinformation, and the protection of human rights in online spaces and various other platforms. In each of these areas, the role of women's leadership and participation is very essential. The Women in Peace Security agenda reminds us that the peace processes are stronger and more sustainable when women are not only protected but meaningfully included in decision-making, leadership, and community resilience. New Zealand has a very strong, long championed multilateral cooperation and gender equality, including through its engagement with the United Nations and the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals. France too has a strong global advocate for gender equality and women's rights, including through its feminist foreign policy and leadership in international forums. This evening's dialogue reflects the value of partnerships between governments, academics, civil society and international institutions in advancing these goals. It is my privilege to warmly welcome and acknowledge our host this evening, Her Excellency Laurence, Beau, Ambassador of France to New Zealand. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your leadership and Embassy's support in bringing this together, this important conversation today. I would also like to acknowledge Mr. Clément Lienard, the political and press advisor at the Embassy of France, for his collaboration and support in organizing this event, along with his team. And of course, we are honored to be joined by our distinguished panel speakers, Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brosnan, Emily Thompson, Professor Nicola Gaston, and Teresa Tepania-Ashton, whose work across defense, digital safety, academy, and indigenous leadership brings valuable perspectives to this discussion today. To all those you are here this evening, members of the diplomatic corps, academics, civil society leaders, and friends of United Nations, thank you. Thank you for joining us. It shouldn't be everything. For your continued commitment and support. Naurera, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ishant, for your inspiring leadership and vision for United Nations Association of New Zealand. I pass the mic to Clément.
I think this mic works better. So, hello everyone, I'm Clément from the French Embassy, as you may know. I will call Her Excellency Laurence Beau to come here to present presentation.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, dear NZDF representatives, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the residence of France for this inspiring roundtable on women, peace and security as we celebrate International Women's Day. I would like first to extend my thanks to Ishant Ghuylani, President of the Wellington branch of the UN Association of New Zealand, and his team, with whom our embassy has worked hand in hand over these past weeks to organize this event. I would also like to extend my gratitude to our 4 speakers who have agreed to come today to share their experience on this issue. And I would like to thank my dear Clément Lienard, my dear colleague and all his team, Charlotte and all the press team for this great organization. Thank you. I know exactly what it is to organize such an event. It's a lot of work, so thank you. It is wonderful to see you all gathered here today for a topic that is particularly important to the French diplomacy and to me. Women, peace and security in focus, equal power, equal rights, equal future. I'm particularly proud and honored to welcome you today. Since I arrived in 2022, I have put feminist diplomacy at the core of my work at the embassy and at the core of the work of the embassy as well as my previous postings. For last year's International Women's Day, we organized an event about confronting violence against women and girls. 1 year later, today, equality remains at the core of our commitment. Are we still seeking to address this central issue? I truly value today's opportunity to bring together participants from such diverse backgrounds to enrich this vital conversation in a world where women's rights and sexual and reproductive rights, health rights are being challenged. It is our shared responsibility to oppose those backlashes and countercurrents which are growing all over the world. The purpose behind this roundtable is to broaden our views and map out the obstacles that lie ahead, but also to remain positive about all the accomplishments made in less than 2 generations. Around the world, 142 million women of childbearing age have no access to abortion in any circumstances. And in 2024, 130 women were killed every day by an intimate partner or a member of their family, according to UN Women, making it 1 every 10 minutes. Worldwide, the average pay gap between women and men stands at 35%. So at the current rate of action, it will take close to 300 years to achieve global gender equality. These sobering figures remind us of the urgent need to renew and pursue our efforts in the fight for gender equality and the full enjoyment of women's rights worldwide. As ambassadors to New Zealand and to the Cook Islands, I have noticed the importance women's rights hold in your political landscape here in New Zealand. New Zealand was the first country to grant women the right to vote in 1893, and the first New Zealand ambassador to France was a woman. It is also the sixth country to have reached parity in Parliament in 2022. This is inspiring for building our diplomacies and our democracies. We need more women in leadership. As a public servant and women ambassador, I'm proud to say that the number of French women ambassadors rose from 28% to 36% between 22 and 24, these the last 2 years. France is fully mobilized to strengthen its public policy for gender equality internally so that it can carry its values at the international level more efficiently. Our action is the result of the priority given by the French government to the achievement of equality between women and men. The French Ministry for Equality between Women and Men has made it an integrated policy supported by all ministers. Since 2012, 63% of all bills has had a positive impact on gender equality. And the same year, France has voted the Sauvadet Act, promoting women's access to strategic positions in public service. The Act of the 4th of August 2014 on genuine equality between women and men laid the foundation for gender equality to be attained not only in professional spheres, but also in private and public ones, by granting parental leave to the second parent and by making an offence all acts preventing access to abortion, including blocking access to information. This action is a deep interagency's work, because equity is a cross-cutting challenge. And that is why, in 2019, France was the fourth country to adopt a feminist foreign diplomacy, or diplomatie féministe, following in the footsteps of Sweden, Canada, and Luxembourg. These efforts within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs were rewarded in 2024 with the renewal of the professional equality between women and men label by AFNOR, France's leading independent standards body. Today, some 15 countries share this commitment, placing gender equality and the rights of women and girls at the heart of their foreign policy. Last year, France renewed its commitment towards gender equality by launching its international strategy for feminist diplomacy for the next 4 years. Among its main priorities is the fostering of participation and representation of women in all decision-making processes. I believe role models are fundamental in bringing forward changes both in mindset and in policies. This roundtable contributes to this process, enabling us to share experiences and create joint pathways. Aligned with this new strategy, France has been committed to implement this document with concrete actions in the frame of our MFA's action plan for equality between women and men. For example, France had the honor to host the 4th Feminist Foreign Diplomacy Conference in October last year, and co-chair the Feminist Foreign Policy Group meeting. We launched a number of emblematic initiatives since 2019, such as the Support Fund for Feminist Organizations, strengthening more than 1,400 organizations in 75 countries. In our diplomatic and consular network, we provide a service against sexist and sexual violence available to women from the French community living abroad. That means that if they are victims of violence, the consulate can assist them with advices to access to medical care, social services or legal assistance, all confidentially. If any of our female agents posted abroad, specifically in difficult contexts, wants to access to abortion or infertility treatment, she can receive help to return to France if her country of assignment does not recognize these rights. And on the basis of a roadmap written by each head of missions, like myself, every French diplomatic representation has a roadmap and appoints an equality, gender and integration officer, here Clément Lienard. And we created a laboratory for women's rights online, so that it is the first international discussion platform as an incubator for projects to fight gender-based violence in the digital environment. While continuing to promote women's rights in the face of today's challenges, such as climate change, global health and food insecurity, it is also important to understand the impacts of new developments in the field of digital technology and artificial intelligence. Women remain largely absent from digital and scientific professions. In France, women represent only 20 to 25% of digital jobs. So I'm really interested to hear about our speaker, Nicola Gaston's experience on this topic. AI offers a new set of opportunities to promote gender equality while introducing new challenges and new risks, mirroring and amplifying existing gender biases and inequalities. Gender-based violence online has skyrocketed with the arrival of AI generative platforms and the multiplication of deepfakes sexualizing women. The Christchurch Call Foundation, which continues the work that France and New Zealand began in 2019, has helped understand the role of gender-based extremism online as a contributing factor in violent extremism and terrorism online. Having Emily Thompson present here is an incredible opportunity to hear her insights on her experience working for the Catalyst project. France will continue to push for responses to gender issues in the context of armed conflict and peace building. Women make up 17.3% of the French armed force, which, when including civilian personnel, means the French Ministry of Armed Forces has one of the highest rates of women staff. Its diversity plan aims at enhancing the integration of women, both military and civilian, at all levels and in all professions of the army. Earlier this year, we celebrated the successful arrival of French astronaut Sophie Adenau on the ISS. In 2022, Lieutenant Colonel Sophie Adenau became the first female aviator to be selected for the European Astronaut Corps. Women, along with children, are the first to suffer during conflicts and climate disasters. Peace and security are tightly linked to gender issues. France has strongly supported the inclusion of this resolution in the European Union Strategic Compass, establishing an EU roadmap for security and defense for the coming years. And I am looking forward to Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brosnan's words on the work she has been doing to implement the UN resolution on women, peace and security. During my term as French ambassador to New Zealand, I have made economic issues an important focus of our diplomatic mission here, and last year I had the honor to sign the French Maori Economy Roadmap with Mr. Honi McGregor, Chair of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade's Taumata Maori Trade Advisory Group. On this topic, we supported and organized in June 2024, along with Business France, the event YWCA in Tech in Paris. This event was very concrete and meaningful, as several Maori women entrepreneurs met with French tech representatives, especially at Station F, the biggest European startup incubator. Thus, it is a pleasure to welcome Teresa Tepania-Ashton to this roundtable to hear more about Maori YWCA entrepreneurship. So, over the last few years, we have experienced a great educational and collective awakening, one that we must continue to uphold. I encourage you all to contribute to this collective, meaningful conversation this evening, and I will be very keen to exchange with you after those exciting conversations and presentations. Thank you very much for your presence and your commitment.
Bonsoir. Good evening. It's a real privilege to be here this evening to speak to you about this topic. So this evening I will speak about how the New Zealand Defence Force implements the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and critically how this work strengthens and advances gender equality within our organisation, within New Zealand, across the broader Pacific region and globally. So as you will likely be aware, the 10 United Nations Security Council resolutions that make up the broader Women, Peace and Security framework acknowledge that women and girls experience conflict and crises differently, and that women and girls are also disproportionately affected by violence. However, these resolutions further affirm that women are vital contributors to peace, recovery and stability. This is important to reflect upon because at its heart the WPS agenda recognises that gender equality is essential to peace and security, and New Zealand's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security is underpinned by this principle, and the NZDF is one of the key agencies for implementing this plan. So if we have a look at the New Zealand National Action Plan, there are two broad areas of focus for the New Zealand Defence Force. Firstly, how we strengthen the full and meaningful participation of women within defence and security settings, and secondly, how we translate and integrate the principles of WPS into operational and security-focused outcomes. It's important to acknowledge that these two areas are inextricably connected. In other words, enhancing gender equality within the organisation through inclusive leadership, prevention of gender-based harm, equitable participation and career opportunities is directly connected to being able to apply the principles of WPS in operational contexts. To this end, the NZDF supports internal strategies that continue to uplift the participation of women across all parts of the force. So at this point in time, the NZDF has just over 20% uniformed women, albeit that this number varies across each of the various services. And while there are still challenges that exist with uplifting participation in some parts of the organisation, overall the last 20 years have certainly seen a marked improvement in participation of women as both leaders and decision makers. And I'd like to mention here that it was just over 25 years ago, in the year 2000, that the New Zealand government rescinded the policy which restricted women from enlisting into combat roles. And that was around the same time that I enlisted. And it was very rare to see a woman as a lieutenant colonel, and especially as a lieutenant colonel in a position of command. So now to have a woman serving who is our Chief of Army is really quite significant, and we're very proud of her. I'd also like to highlight that my colleague Nina Russell is here tonight, and she is well positioned to answer any specific questions that you might have after we've spoken about how the New Zealand Defence Force seeks to enhance its gender equality efforts within the organisation. Nina has been instrumental to implementing what we call our Wahine Toa strategy over the last few years. So my particular role is based within our Joint Force headquarters, and it's more aligned with the externally focused dimensions of WPS implementation, which centres around the embedding of WPS into training and operational planning. We have made advances in this area also, especially over the last 10 years, which is the time that we've had our National Action Plan in place. The first National Action Plan was released in 2015, and we just had it re-released and revised last year in 2025. So since implementing WPS in operational contexts, the NZDF has certainly learned that outcomes are strengthened when our people at all rank levels understand the role that gender plays in conflict and crisis settings. So this means being able to recognise gendered dynamics and applying gender analysis in practical terms. This understanding has been supported by the delivery of what we call our Gender Focal Point training, which is a 3-day course, and more than 300 people across the NZDF have now been trained as gender focal points, and they're given the skills to champion women, peace and security within their units, and also given the tools and knowledge to apply a gender perspective or a gender lens within their specific context. So the intent being that they can then translate that into practical application to improve how a specific plan might be executed, ultimately enhancing operational outcomes. So the aim of the GFP training is twofold. Firstly, to raise awareness of gendered experiences of conflict, displacement, insecurity and violence. That includes understanding how men, women, boys and girls are impacted by those situations in different ways. And also to equip all personnel, not just women, and I'd like to highlight here that over 50% of our gender focal points are men, but to give them the tools for analysing gendered impacts. So integrating women, peace and security ensures that the NZDF operations promote gender equality through how we respond to crises and also how we engage with communities. We have seen this applied in recent activities. If we think domestically during the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the Gabrielle response. Internationally, for example, in our planning of potential evacuation of non-combatants. Also on multinational exercises, where we've deployed gender advisors to work alongside their counterparts from other countries across the Indo-Pacific region. And if I compare how we now routinely consider gender compared to when we didn't, I can give an example of when I was deployed to Afghanistan in around 2005, and we had interpreters to speak with the local Afghan community. And at no stage in my mind did I really think about the fact that all of our interpreters were men. Which was certainly a potential blind spot that we haven't given consideration. And whether or not this affected our engagement with the local women, I'm not sure. And to be fair, I only have myself to blame because I was the one doing the hiring. But it just goes to show that just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you apply a gender perspective naturally just by virtue of being a woman. Instead, it's a skill that all people learn by recognising and often challenging the gendered norms and expectations around us. So New Zealand's National Action Plan also places strong emphasis on supporting security and stability throughout the Pacific region, and the NZDF is a key implementing agency to deliver on this commitment. Security outcomes are achieved through training, regional cooperation and partnerships. And our Women, Peace and Security Directorate has a naturally strong working relationship with the Australian Defence Forces Directorate, and we also chair the Pacific Defence Gender Network, which is a collaborative support group for incorporating representation from across the Pacific region. So when we integrate the principles of WPS into defence processes, we are fundamentally integrating gender and equality into the way we think, plan and operate. And in this way, Women, Peace and Security could perhaps be described as the bridge between gender equality within the organisation and our externally focused operational outputs. So just to conclude, research shows us that gender equality is the #1 predictor of peace. By integrating WPS, we are seeking to build a more equitable environment internally. We are also seeking to improve operational outcomes by ensuring that we consider the differing needs of all genders that may be affected by conflict and crisis. Here we recognise that peace building must reflect women's voices, women's needs and women's leadership. In saying that, however, I would also like to highlight the critical role of men and masculinities in conflict and peace building, which we see being played out in all various forms globally. If we're to advance gender equality, I truly believe we must understand and also challenge the gendered norms and expectations that are placed upon men and boys also. But to finish, I'd like to reiterate that the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is one of the most significant tools we have for advancing gender equality. And to quote our Deputy Commander of the Joint Force Headquarters, it's also what he considers one of the most important factors in preventing conflict, or where conflict is inevitable, for minimising the impact on women and girls and supporting security and stability post-conflict. As such, we do take it very seriously within the New Zealand Defence Force. So thank you very much. Open to questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Amy. I will now give the floor to Emily Thompson, which will present the following subject. So, how to concretely fight against women harassment online. The example of the project Catalyst. So, the French Embassy works a lot with the Christchurch Foundation, and I'm a huge fan of the Catalyst project, so I can wait for this presentation.
Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou. Firstly, I want to thank Her Excellency Mrs. Laurence Beau for hosting this programme this evening, to the team at the Embassy and the residents here, and the United Nations Association of New Zealand for hosting this really important roundtable. And to my fellow panellists, it's an honour to be sharing the big stage with you tonight. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to share a little more about Project Catalyst at the Christchurch Foundation. For those of you who aren't familiar, perhaps, the Christchurch Call arose out of the live streaming of the horrific terrorist attack in Christchurch in 2019, where 51 Muslims were murdered and 50 were injured as they worshipped. The event was being live streamed by the terrorists for 17 minutes and viewed over 4,000 times before it was removed. And this attack really highlighted the multitude of harms that can be caused by terrorist and violent extremist content being shared online. So the Christchurch Call was created in great partnership with the Government of France and the Government of Canada by Dame Jacinda Ardern. And we bring together heads of state and government and the technology sector under a series of shared commitments focused on our sole purpose, which is to eliminate violent and extremist and terrorist content from the internet. And in 2024, the Christchurch Call became the Christchurch Call Foundation. We're now a non-governmental organisation continuing the important work that the Christchurch Call set up. So, importantly, in 2022 and 2023, the Christchurch Call leaders came together and identified technology facilitated gender-based violence and its links to terrorism and violent extremism as a priority for the Christchurch Call to consider how to deal with those issues. So, as a result of that, today I'll share some insights into the work that we're doing at the rather nicely named Project Catalyst part of our organisation. Catalyst is a large-scale consortium-based project that's led by the Christchurch Call Foundation, and we're looking explicitly at that intersection of online violent misogyny, technology facilitated gender-based violence and violent extremism. As I'm sure most folks in this room are acutely aware, this is a really pervasive harm, and in many contexts we know it's a recognised gateway to different forms of extremism and terrorism. And as Mrs. Beau explained, we know this is also becoming increasingly common, and particularly targeting our young people. And I thought there was going to be a table for my so now awkwardly move my paper. So our focus on misogyny and gender-based violence is grounded in several foundational understandings. As I said, we believe that misogyny is a gateway to other forms of violent extremism. It constitutes a form of violent extremism in itself, and it can be a motivator towards further acts of terrorism. We know that misogynistic narratives are present across a spectrum of extremist ideologies, ranging from neo-Nazism to anti-Semitism, jihadism, anti-immigrant beliefs, and a number more that serve really as a driver of radicalisation to violence. Studies have shown across the UK, Indonesia, Bangladesh, the Philippines and Libya that men and boys who support violence against women and girls are up to 3 times more likely to support violent extremism. And this translates, unfortunately, into a real-world loss of life. A great study came out from Canada recently, exploring terrorist manifestos from 1966 through 2025. And they found that in 40% of those manifestos there is a reference to gender-based violence, either as a primary or a secondary motivator for the attack. And that's something that we don't hear very often, but is really important to highlight. Another important study also showed that misogynistic grievances can become ideological drivers for violent extremism, evidenced in a study that looked at mass shootings in the United States, where they found that 34 to 45% of those were also motivated in part by grievances against women. To date, however, there are few initiatives that exist that kind of address these hybrid harms all in one place, and so Catalyst seeks to address that gap. We have over 12 different activity tracks that we're working on currently. Those include prevention programming, practical online mitigation tools, and also working on policy and capacity building. And this is delivered by the Christchurch School Foundation by working with our specialist consortium, which is made up of partners from around the world, including the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, Search for Common Ground, MEDAN, and PERIL, which is the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab at American University. We're also working with some other key academic institutions, at Oxford University, the Blavatnik School of Governance, the Hertie School in Berlin, and the Vauxhall Institute. Our work is really amplified through our Catalyst Forum, which I'd be happy to share information about how to join later. This is an impact network convened across governments, platforms, academia and civil society, and we meet monthly. We bring together over 100 members to talk about these really critical issues, to share knowledge and develop best practices. Our Catalyst project, it's organised across 3 mutually reinforcing and linked objectives, and these are intended to reduce the influence of online misogyny and gender-based violence in radicalising men and boys to participate in violent extremism. And we're currently delivering those programmes in 4 languages across 3 countries: Canada in English and French, Jordan in Arabic, and Kenya in Swahili. So our first pillar looks at prevention. We want to equip young boys and men and the communities around them, because we know this doesn't happen in a vacuum, to recognise, resist and interrupt misogynistic narratives and behaviours before they then harden into grievances, socialised hatreds and ultimately mobilisation to violence. Some examples from this project, from this objective, include university-anchored peer mentor interventions in Canada and Kenya and Jordan. We're training young leaders to facilitate discussions on difficult conversations around online harms, violence and misogyny, and mentoring younger cohorts through a train-the-trainer model. We're developing inoculation-based video interventions, which are designed to preempt recruitment tactics and reduce susceptibility to these kinds of manipulative narratives. In Kenya, our colleagues are creating a digital community stewards program, which is training young men to steward large online communities, uphold codes of conduct and promote respectful dialogue. Our second pillar, mitigation. We're focusing on making misogynistic and extremist content harder to find and share, thereby disrupting its normalisation, whilst improving detection of this material and its assessment, and improving the response capacity of platforms and communities. So in this stream, we're looking at creating open source, artificial intelligence-driven large language models that are available in Arabic and Swahili to detect technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Those are kind of low-resource languages, and it provides great then resources for folks in those countries to be able to target this kind of content that's being shared online in their nation. The third pillar, protection. We're looking at strengthening the ability of governments and civil society to prevent and identify gender-based violence and how it intersects with violent extremism. Currently, my colleagues are on their way to Berlin, working to select candidates for our Public Policy Champions Programme. That's going to offer training and policy education to leaders, including civil servants and trust and safety leaders from tech platforms, giving them skills, networking opportunities, and an evidence base, so then they can return back to the organisations and frameworks that they work within to implement policies that hopefully will be more responsive to dealing with the issues of gender-based violence. You can see there's a lot of programmes. We're also planning a high-level convening in Oxford this September, which is going to bring together high-level political leaders to endorse best practices across an international community, particularly focused around prevention programming, and also to bring together people engaging in sustained action. At the end of this month, I'm excited to say we're going to be launching a new resource hub for parents, educators, caregivers, and other trusted adults, which we're calling Level Up Safely. This is being launched in partnership with the UK Home Office. It's going to be a resource hub that's featuring an e-learning course to educate folks about misogyny, violent extremism, and video gaming. We want to help those caring adults understand the world of gaming, the challenges that young people are facing in these spaces, and then how we can best support them in building resilience to harmful content online. We know that if we target misogynist influences on young people, there's this common strand that's tying many different types of violent extremism together, then that gives us a critical step to protect girls and women in online and offline spaces. We'll also be launching a podcast to go with that as well, to offer another way to access this kind of information, and then localising for our Canadian and Arabic and Swahili audiences. So in conclusion, Catalyst is designed on purpose to trial lots of different promising, innovative approaches that we can scale up after our first 18 months of activity. We'll then take the most effective programs and scale those with our partners and platforms and governments, of which there are many partnered, thankfully, with the Christchurch call. And this Sunday marks the 7th anniversary of the mosque attacks, and I'll be attending a ceremony in Christchurch. We know that the challenges that we face in confronting violent extremism and terrorism online are persistent, but our resolve to face them head-on is also persistent too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. I will now give the floor to Nicola Gaston, which is physics professor at the Auckland University, and will speak about, and will actually answer the question, how do we fight against sexism in science?
I will try to answer that question. I'm not sure I'll give a complete answer, but I'm happy to talk about it. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Nicola Gaston, tōku ingoa. My name is Nicola Gaston. I'm Professor of Physics at the University of Auckland and also the Director of the MacDiarmid Institute for Advanced Materials and Nanotechnology, which is based here in Wellington. So I wear a couple of different hats. I'm here, I think, primarily because I wrote a book just over 10 years ago, which was called Science is Sexist. And I didn't think it was a particularly contentious title at the time because, from my perspective, there was unequal representation of women and men in science, and therefore there was something that was changing that representation. And if you think of sexism as simply a mechanism that produces unequal representation, then it was very demonstrably and objectively true as a scientist that science was sexist. And I wrote the book on that basis. And so it was very much a book that I wrote based on my own experience. Being a scientist, finding it actually a wonderful career. And my perspective was very much that, the idea of equal participation in science is a matter of fairness. And representation is the best measure of that fairness, and so I wanted to look into this. And I'd had not really any negative personal experiences, which was why I felt able to write the book, but I'd had enough experiences of just being in an uncomfortable situation. Maybe I was the one person at a conference who was a woman, and there were 50 other people and they were all men, and then maybe somebody would make a comment about that. There would be maybe the occasional comment about maybe women not belonging, that kind of thing. And so a lot of the book was based on the psychological literature. So my main realization was that I was a scientist, I worked at a scientific institute, therefore I had access to scientific libraries. Oh my goodness. And so you can actually go and read the psychological literature as a physicist and find out what the psychologists can tell you about sexism in science, and it turns out they've done a lot of work on the subject. And so the book was really looking at a few key papers which describe what happens when a CV, for example, has the name on it changed from the name of a woman to the name of a man, from John to Jennifer, and then they can send that CV out for evaluation, and the questions are, would you hire this person? How do you evaluate them for competence? How do you evaluate them for likability? What would you offer them as a salary? And on all of these questions, if the name at the top of the CV is that of a man, the answer comes back much more positively. And the salary difference in terms of what the person would be offered is like 12%, which was, it sticks in my mind because it was the gender pay gap in New Zealand at the time, it was around 12%. And so I remember reading this paper, it came out in 2012, I wrote the book in 2014. But I ended up writing it about a little bit more than just the psychological literature on the basis of my own experience, because I wanted to try to understand what the mechanisms were. So we have the unconscious bias, these different evaluations, but then what's actually going on? My experience of working with male colleagues in science was that for the most part my colleagues were progressive people who believed in the equality of women. So why were we still struggling to fix the problem? That was the sort of problem I had in my head. And so this particular study it's a work by Moss and Recusson, 2012, looking at the CVs. There are a few key facts that are really pertinent. One is that if it's women evaluating the CV, it's just as sexist. So women are not immune from this. It's a cultural problem, not an individual bias problem. Second problem is that when psychologists do these studies in general, this study was the first one that was done on scientists, so it was really testing. The key new novel thing in this paper was they'd done the study on scientists who were actually working as scientists. It reproduced data that has been done many, many times over on undergraduate college students. And so actually the key takeaway is that it's not an issue of age or of generations when we talk about gender bias. It's not that old people don't get it because it was different back in their day. You know, old people are generally quite straightforward about these things. You know, people learn. But coming back to actually a little bit of what Emily said around, you know, the younger generation and their exposure to problematic messaging and misogyny online, a lot of what is most horrifying is the psychological studies that have been done on undergraduate college students and just the extent to which those show the same biases. And there's been a lot actually in the media in the last few years around, you know, young men and their expectations of women and why that's a problem. So I sort of encountered all of this in the context of science and women's participation in science. And I didn't keep talking about it for too long because it felt like the conversation was changing in a really positive way. I started talking about it and then people were talking about diversity, they were talking about inclusion, they were talking about intersectional issues of isms, so not just sexism but racism, all of the different ableism, all of the different things that exclude people from scientific careers and other careers. And I felt like this was a really good thing. I'd written my piece, I could sit back, other people could talk about their parts of the story, and I got on with my career a wee bit. And then something sort of happened in the last 5 years that we went from institutions talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, having strategies, talking about institutional mechanisms for putting all of this in place and making a difference, to DEI suddenly being a bad word, being banned, being explicitly redacted from scientific applications in certain countries, and the idea that there's a woke agenda that somehow we're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes and that the world is really unfair to white men. I mean, these are political narratives that have become quite commonplace in the last few years. And so one of the things that I really did learn from writing the book was actually talking to older women of a previous generation who'd been through this already. So they were often the first woman in a particular scientific department doing their particular area of science. And so I spoke to a few of them as part of writing the book, and there was a general feeling that yes, we did this and we pushed, and then there was a wave back the other way. And so this idea that we've gone through this process of progress but then backlash, I think one of the things that I take away from my experience is that that's a natural progression. It doesn't mean that we have to accept it, but that backlash will come for us when we try to make progress. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to make progress, but we need to just understand that there is pushback. I do want to just spend a few minutes talking about the nature of that pushback and where I see it coming from. Because there's something in science that I've come to identify. Partly it's maybe working in a physics department is particularly bad for this, but if you're a professor in physics, you tend to get emails or sometimes physical mail from gentlemen who are mostly retired engineers, and they've come up with a theory of everything, and they want to explain to you why all the textbooks are wrong, and they've discovered this amazing thing. And this is a real phenomenon in physics. And I've sort of come to see it as like a certain type of science fanboyism. And I don't say that too dismissively, but I do think there was a generation of men who were really encouraged to see themselves as belonging in science, that science was a male endeavour, and so they sort of attached themselves to it in a way. They're very interested in it, will always email after a scientific talk, want to know what's going on, all that sort of thing. And it's an interesting thing that I've reflected on a wee bit in the context of something that I talked about in the book. So one of the examples of the kind of hypothesis that the psychological literature was pushing back against was the idea that if there is a difference between the representation of women and men in science, it must be because men are better at it and women are not as good. And there are different versions of this hypothesis. One of those versions is that of Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard, and this was just a couple of years before I wrote the book. He gave a speech in which he said, it's not because all men are better than all women, it's just because men are more diverse, and so there are more men at the top end, and there are more women in the middle. He was trying to use statistics to make this sound scary or something. But the reason I come back to the Larry Summers hypothesis, and particularly who he was, is because of some of the reading I've been doing in the last few days, weeks, around the Epstein files. And I want to really explicitly make that connection here, because there was a cabal of men, Larry Epstein, Larry Summers, others like Laurence Krauss, who was accused of sexual harassment at Arizona, and so a whole story around that. It's all in the Epstein files. And a large number, actually, of male scientists, too many of whom I know the names of, and I know too much about what they do professionally. And there's a really large extent to which they have documented their deliberate attempts to exclude women from science. And this is intimately connected with the abuse of young women and girls in Epstein's paedophilia. So, I do think, I feel almost guilty at times, because I wrote a book that was very much around the unconscious bias and trying to take people along on a journey of just understanding that sometimes we do this stuff without thinking about it, and we can all be part of the solution if we want to be. But I do think we need to acknowledge that there has been really deliberate work to exclude women from public life and from positions of power. And we do need to call this out now. There's a thing around, I was wondering what to say around science in this particular context, because I'm not sure that science, peace and security, I wasn't quite sure how to fit these things together. But in the context of technology as a very rapidly developing space, I think there is actually quite a lot to say. Whether it's around AI, the development of Grok and the abuse of women through that platform, very directly led by Elon Musk, and that sort of concentration of technological and economic power in the hands of people who are leading our technological development at the moment through AI and other systems. And this has been called out by other people. Timnit Gebru, who was at Google and left as a woman of colour, who really called out the biases in AI, was one of the key figures I looked to as having really challenged the system before it got underway. But I think as scientists, we actually have an expectation, a responsibility to think about how science interacts with technology. So on the one hand, science tends to create knowledge and create equipment, tools that can be used for certain purposes, and that can be something that is democratizing. If you think around something like a solar panel that you put on somebody's house, and then they have access to their own energy and they can see what it means, what timescale the energy is produced on, and all of this. The knowledge there is power. But at the same time, technology concentrated as it is happening to be in the context of AI and other tools in the hands of just a few people is actually a little bit scary. There's this idea that tech can either work for us or we can work for tech. I think of the example of the Waymo cars, the self-driving cars in California, where they're now calling up door dashers to go and close the doors because the passengers get out and they leave the door open, and then the car can't drive off and do anything, so they need to get somebody something like $11, and you go and you close the door and you get paid your $11. And so it's a little bit of a metaphor, but it's, do we want tech to be something that works for us, or do we want to be in a position where we're working for big tech? And I think there are real decisions to be made there, discussions to be had about tech as a democratizing influence or capability, and I worry that we're not having those conversations often enough, and so that's sort of where my thinking has taken me to, thinking around science and sexism and how reflecting on that can maybe take us in a positive direction. So I'm not sure I gave you a proper answer to your question, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I'm now very grateful to give the floor to Teresa Tepania-Ashton. Would you like to stay here or stand?
Tēnā rā tātou katoa. He uri tēnei no te taitokoro i te tātou ki pāpā no Ngāti ki Pangaro, te tātou ki māma no hoki o ngā hakapaukrakia, e mihi ana ko Teresa Tepania-Ashton tōku ingoa. E mihi ana ki a koe i te māreikura Laurence tō whakaharinga o tēnei huinga no reira kia tātou katoa tēnā tātou. I just let you know that I hail from the whānau, in fact only from the whānau, according to my parents, and I just really wanted to pay homage to Her Excellency Laurence for this amazing event, and it's lovely to be here with everyone, particularly the panelists. Entrepreneurship, I wanted to say, actually before I go there, I just want to say, because we talked about pay equity, and of course this week, if you didn't see it, the Still Minding the Gap campaign was released, and it's about invoicing the PM for the total sum of pay equity for women And in actual fact, a month ago I started the role as CEO of YWCA in Tamaki Makaurau, and to consider that that organisation for more than 100 years has been fighting for equity gaps, let alone pay equity. And it just worries me that, you know, our young women, our young girls entering into the workforce are starting off their careers already behind the gap. So those sorts of issues are really, really important for us to, and I know that most of us are already there, but you know, it's just something I wanted to land there today. But entrepreneurship, I have to say that I grew up in a family who were entrepreneurs. In fact, we were quite a poor family. We grew up in South Auckland, but my father had a vision of prosperity, of opportunities, of making change for future generations to come. And luckily, as a young girl, I grew up inside that business. And this is like in the late 60s, early 70s, where actually no Māori were in business, where he couldn't get access to finance, and so had to really change the way in which he did business in order to be successful. So I grew up with that mindset that nothing came easy. You really had to be innovative. And so when much of this context of this talk will be around my role as CEO of Māori Women's Development for over 10 years, and really what I experienced firsthand in relation to the inequities that our women, particularly Māori women, face. There are 3 sectors I want to talk about. 1 is around systems gaps, 2 is around wellbeing, and 3 is around return on investment and the decisions we make. So the first one around systems gap. Well, first and foremost, access to capital has got to be one of those. In fact, here in New Zealand still today, Pacifica and Māori women are less likely to get funded for their enterprise. And so imagine when you're the CEO of an entity who is in charge of finance to be able to lend to women to start and expand businesses. You've got to think about things differently. And so with systems as well, many people go, I know that many people rush immediately to, we have to get access to capital, and that's absolutely true. But it must come with support, it must come with capability building, it must come with mentorship, with, you know, all the tools and possibilities to ensure that our women are successful, so that we're not setting up women to fail once they are in that credit system. And so when I was with Māori Women's Development, we completely changed our whole operation so that 80% was actually free access to free mentoring, free service, professional services, whether it's accounting, whether it's marketing, whatever it might be that's required for that business, because that was what was required to make any woman who came to us to get a loan successful. And then 20% of our business was about actually teaching them about the responsibilities of having a credit line, of being able to really plan ahead and ensure that they were capable enough to manage their finances as well. So that's how you transform models. The second gap I always saw was well-being. Women, I have to say, they come with traumatic trauma. They come with history of trauma. And so imagine trying to move ahead when your everyday worry is what's happened to you, whether it's in the past year, whether it's something they were born with. Imagine overcoming that when you're trying to think about the future. And so guess what? The biggest change in our organisation was ensuring that life coaching, working alongside our women to overcome the daily challenges, the historical challenges, to uplift and empower that woman internally to be the best person they can, is what makes change. The third thing I want to talk about is around return on investment, because you go to a bank today, you ask for any amount of money, they will have a long list of criteria. But imagine if you change that criteria so that the number one criteria was, what sort of support do you have at home? Are the children being looked after? Do you have family there to support you? Do you have a community that surrounded you to help you within your business, to help you at home? Imagine if that's a criteria. Imagine if another criteria is all about ensuring that if environmental outcomes is important to you, that's a tick. Imagine if another criteria that's important to you is about actually having my children in the business, you know, as part of that business. So what I'm trying to say is that if you build systems and environments and infrastructures to be able to support our women in every single sector of their lives, so that they are empowered, they are fought after, they are supported in every sector, that makes change. So this is just an example of what can be done. For me at Māori Women's Development, it was essential because not enough women were succeeding in business. Not enough women were getting the right support at the right time with the right people. And guess what? Guess who were the people who came to the parties to support them? Other women. Other women already in business. Other women who are already facing the same challenges. The conversations at the table are different when you're supported by women who are going through exactly the same trauma or turmoil that on an everyday basis. I'm looking at one of those women who's standing at the back there, Natalie. She was one of my number one support people providing services to our women on a daily basis. Now she's a powerhouse in her own right because she makes things happen. She overcomes obstacles that you wouldn't even imagine on a daily basis because she cares. And so really that's my lasting message, is about how much do we care? How much are we prepared to make different systems work for different people to ensure that decision making is based on who we are and where we come from. The last thing I want to really touch on is around the return on investment, is that returns come in different languages. Investments come in different forms. So what do we value most? Kia ora.
Thank you very much. It was really amazing, very impressive. We will start now. We are a bit short on time, but that's always the case. We'll start a short Q&A right now, so if you have any questions you want to ask, don't hesitate to. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui rā atu kia koutou katoa. Thank you so much for all of your conversations and all of your passion behind this. I just wanted to ask, all of you have mentioned some aspect of trauma and the levels of CPTSD seen in young women in particular, especially on online platforms around the Epstein files right now. It's just increasing and we don't even have real numbers on that. How are we supposed to bring in a lot of these young women who are their first interaction with the internet, their first interaction with the world will be seeing the Epstein files and seeing those things online and talking about it and having to deal with it at ages that we shouldn't even be thinking about things like that, and they're having to come into, you know, high school where everyone around them is aware of these things and talking about it. How are we supposed to help them, and how are we supposed to provide a safety net around them when it comes to, you know, school, being online, going into the workplace, going into university? Yeah, sorry, that's a massive question, but
terrific.
Yeah.
Who wants to take the floor?
Great question. A lot to unpack, and I wish there was a simple, nice bundle of options we could offer. I think the approach we're taking, specifically on one project strand that we're working on, the Level Up Safely piece, which provides parents and caring adults with strategies. I think what we need to prioritize is how you have conversations around these things, especially I think it's quite overwhelming for parents and folks who are looking after young people to even comprehend what goes on in somebody's cell phone or on their laptop or tablet. So if we can equip those caring adults with the mechanism of having a great, honest conversation, even if it's not perfect, is probably a really good starting point. And so that's something we've focused on in our new resources, is to structure out those conversations to help guide folks through. And just to touch on what Nicola was saying about utilising AI, we are trying to then do good by implementing perhaps like a chatbot that's got psychological supports built into it, so that parents can ask the magical chatbot questions specific to their kid or what's going on, and it will be able to kind of help walk them through their strategy. But I think the overarching thing is that we need to start media literacy and digital citizenship education as young as possible. We've seen challenges with overall social media bans in other countries, which means then that most likely those kids are going to be behind the curve when it comes to 18 and they're granted access to this magical world. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
I want to say a couple of words more, largely around my experience as an academic dealing with young people at university, where, you know, I've dealt with a number of young women who've needed support, who have maybe wanted to make a complaint or who have considered making a complaint, and I've also dealt with women who have not wanted to really see the fact that there is a problem. And so my take on it is a little bit that, as far as possible, you know, I try not to make the fact that the sexism is really obvious and blatant and is going to affect you eventually anybody's problem before they're sort of ready for that conversation. But I also think that there's a really important role of, you know, transparency and disclosure, and you know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. It's, you know, you don't always want to be laying all of this stuff out all the time because it's exhausting, and it really does, you know, women need to be able to engage at university or in other areas without having to deal with this all of the time. So there's a balancing act between including people in conversations and making sure that they have the tools to be safe, and not talking about it constantly, because it is exhausting.
Any other questions?
John O'Brien here at UN Association New Zealand. I just wanted to ask a question about the Royal New Zealand Navy ship, the Mananui, which was sunk, and there's been a lot of criticism in the media saying that it was sunk because the captain was a woman, which is pretty outrageous. And I just wondered if any of the panelists had any thoughts or comments on how we can combat that kind of, you know, opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'd just like to highlight what our Minister of Defence said when that first rose as an issue, and I thought that was fabulous, and that's what we need more of, was her comment that if there was one reason that that ship sunk, it is not because the captain was a woman. So really it is about having the leadership of the country stepping up and making those sorts of comments very clear.
Maybe the last one. I saw a hand there.
Thank you everyone for your thoughts. My question was around unconscious bias, and so I think we have this challenge that we learn about bias, but then, and you know, there are examples we still continue to do it due to mental load and a range of other things. So just wondering what, after education being very important in some areas it can reduce, what are the other things we can do to try and enforce that we don't continue to fall down the same biases?
I'm happy to have a go at that, just based on the literature. Yeah, which is that in general, if you have good processes around decision making where ahead of making a decision you talk about the criteria that you are making that decision based on, then that's the primary mechanism by which people will make decisions that then are not reliant on unconscious biases. So they do this with CVs, and there'll be two different types of CV, and one will have somebody with more education and one will have somebody with more experience. And if you do that and swap the gender, then there's a preference for the man regardless of which CV it is. But if you talk about it in advance and you say, well, we need somebody with a high degree of education, or we need somebody with a high degree of experience, then the bias tends to go away in the decision-making process. So that's sort of the general principle in the psychological literature that I point people to, because I think it's good procedurally to just think about discussing in advance how you're making a decision, what you're making the decision on the basis of. That doesn't mean that the biases don't still crop up in our brains all the time in little contexts. Of course they do. But at least for important things, we can try to rely on good process and implement good process and insist on good process in institutions when we have the power to do that.
I just would like to add to that there are certain times also when we need to be deliberately conscious of the differences between genders too. So if we take a completely gender blind approach, we can inadvertently heighten the inequalities. So certainly when it comes to promotions or those types of decisions that are being made within the organisation, if we're not acknowledging that one person may have a smoother pathway because they don't have the burden of potential child rearing, then we're not applying equity across those decisions. So there's a time and place for both, for gender conscious and potentially gender blind decisions.
Yes, the only other thing I'll add to that is, the values that are guiding you. We mentioned intersectional feminism before, and so if whatever your goal is or your aspiration is, and the criteria is, if you haven't actually fulfilled the environment with those gaps, then you're actually not achieving what you should be set out to do anyway. So for me, it's always identifying actually where is our vision, what are our values, are we uplifting those?
I think we will close here. I will start the last words of the panel. So I hope you enjoyed this night. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I'm really proud to be there along with you, and I really would like to thank you a lot for being there, talking about this very important topic. We were talking about it yesterday with Her Excellency Beau, and we said that we don't need only one Women's Rights Day. We need several, because all the discussions are amazingly interesting. So we would like to continue this in the future. Then I really would like, of course, to thank you, Amandine and Ishant from the Union's Wellington branch. It has been amazing to work with you and to organize this moment. And of course, I would like to thank my team and Ambassador Beau for welcoming us tonight. So thank you, everyone. As I said, I feel really proud tonight to be here, and especially as a young diplomat man, a young guy, because we are not that many in the room, as you may notice. And while hearing what you were saying, I think it's one of the most important topics in the topic to make men commit more on these topics, on equality, actually. And yeah, I will conclude with one anecdote, as we say in French, one short story which happened to me the first weeks I arrived in Wellington. I was with Ambassador Beau. We were going to the presentation of the Women's Gender Attitude Survey of the New Zealand Council of Women, and we learned that night that the report's results show that in 2025 we can observe more and more backlashes towards the relation between young men and young women. And the word backlash is, you said it several times, and I think it's a very very important subjects for the future generations. And this trend, so we saw last September, is very dangerous because obviously young people are the future. So I'm saying general things, but that's pretty true. and so if they start out their lives entrenched in polarized views, they will start to question the core of our social link. And this link is very important, especially in democracies, especially right now. So this is why I think our work as diplomats, our work is to make people talk to each other, to present their views, and to hear from, and especially to listen from each other. So I really want to thank you for everything. And yeah, I just learned a saying in Maori last week, and it says "Kia kaha," and so I would like to say this to everyone. It means stand strong. And ngami, thank you, merci beaucoup. We will have now a short cocktail together. We will be able to talk together a bit more intimately. So thank you very much.